Okay, great. I'm going to introduce everybody else on the panel here, starting at the end with Ada Calhoun. I've actually known Ada for years as an editor of mine and a writing buddy and just a person around town. She was recently called a micro-celebrity, which I think she's actually a fairly macro-celebrity in my world. But Ada's the author of the excellent nonfiction book, Also a Poet, which was a best book of 2022, announced as a best book of 2022 by NPR, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. And also she has written Why We Can't Sleep and St. Mark's is Dead. She lives in Manhattan, and Crush is her first novel. That's right, yes. I apologize for reading off of my phone. I couldn't find my iPad, and my handwriting is terrible. Next to her is Molly Roden Winter. She lives in Brooklyn with her family, where she writes and makes music. Her singer-songwriter duo is called House of Mirth, and More is her first book. And right next to me is Jaclyn Geller, Professor Jaclyn Geller, an associate professor of English at Central Connecticut State University, where she specializes in restoration and 18th century studies. She's the author of a previous book, Here Comes the Bride, Women, Weddings, and the Marriage Mystique, along with various academic writing. She lives in Connecticut and New York City. So I'd love to get started by just talking a little bit about each of your books individually, and then we'll have a little convo, and then we'll be sure to leave plenty of room for questions from the audience, because I think this is a topic that interests everybody. Whether you're married, single, well, I guess those are kind of the two options they give you on a census sheet, but we can even discuss that. Let's start with Molly. Molly, your book is a memoir, and it covers a period in your marriage and life when you and your husband decided to open your marriage. And it describes that process where you start to have other relationships, and he starts to have other relationships. And I'm curious about both your feelings when your marriage started to change. You decided to change your marriage. Did you want to write about it right away, or what was the kind of timing between going through those experiences and writing about them?
Yeah, thanks. And we don't have individual mics. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I know that's okay. If you guys can hear me, it's fine. Yeah, I never, ever wanted to write about being in an open marriage. That was never the plan. And often an early question is, are you still married? And are you still open? And the answer is yes and yes. So we've now been open for 17 years and married for 25 years. So the book tells the story of the first 10 years, and I had really, I didn't really want to tell anybody that we were in an open marriage. My mother was one of the few people I told, which usually shocks people, but if you read the book, my parents also had an open marriage.
That part is so fascinating.
It is rather fascinating. There's not a lot of second generation open marriage people out there. And they never told me. They had that as a secret. It was my aunt who had a couple too many vodka tonics and told me. And it took me a year to even confront my mother. So when I wrote the book, my parents had to tell my sister, for example. When I first got the idea for the book, the biggest obstacles were, first of all, that my parents weren't open. And I mean, they were open, but they weren't open. You know what I mean? And my younger son did not know that we had this arrangement. So it felt like an idea that I should just wait for it to go away, right? It came to me actually during a meditation, and it felt like kind of an otherworldly piece of inspiration, but the obstacles started to drop away. My youngest found out the next week after I had this idea, and then I thought, well, I better talk to my parents. And it turns out they had actually also considered writing a book. They were going to use pen names, though, and they were big on my doing that, and I didn't want to do that. So I I asked their permission, and I spoke to my husband about it. My husband and my name and my parents' names are the only names that I didn't change in the book, but I felt like it was really important for us to own our story. It felt like it would be a very different book if I didn't stand behind it and didn't feel willing to talk about it, because there is a lot of, shame. Anytime there's something that's a secret, my belief is that there's some shame around it. And so my hope is that, not that I'm telling people that they should do this. If anything, I think people who read it will say it's more of a cautionary tale. It's hard. It's really, really hard. Marriage is hard, and open marriage is very, very hard. So I wanted to tell the real truth about it without proselytizing, but also standing behind what I do and who I am, and being a model for an alternate way of being married.
That's really cool. It strikes me that, actually, having read all three of your books, that all three of them could easily be sort of described first and foremost by the word honest. Each of these books is a very honest, very open, in some cases kind of painfully honest look at this institution we call marriage. Ada, your book is a novel, and this fascinates me because I think of you as just one of our great nonfiction writers, and yet you chose to write a novel that you acknowledge is somewhat autobiographical in many ways. The couple in your book decides to open their marriage, but it isn't quite like Molly's story with her husband Stuart, where they were reading all the polyamory books and kind of figured out that there were some ground rules. In your novel, Ada, the couple decide to open their marriage because the husband says to his wife, "It's okay with me if you flirt with men and kiss men," because those were things that the husband knew his wife was missing. And the wife falls in love with somebody else. The husband, it turns out, has been hiding some of his own things. I'm really curious about how you decided to write it, why you decided to write a novel rather than a memoir about your marriage. What were the mechanics behind that and the emotion?
Yes, no, they do it very badly.
They're actually chastised by a therapist about how badly they do it.
They're scolded relentlessly for how they do it. They should have been doing it this other way if they wanted to do it. Actually, it's funny. I was just reminded by Ariel that I had done this online book event during the pandemic, and so the pandemic was when my book about Generation X women came out, called Why We Can't Sleep. And for that book, I interviewed like hundreds of women, and they were all like, "I wish I could just blow up my life and start over." And it was this: they had grown up as Gen X women, thinking like, I should have it all, I should do it all, and it sort of resulted in this exhaustion. And so then the pandemic did come along and did blow it up, not in the way that they had hoped. And then I wound up, on these screens looking at maybe some of you in little boxes, and everybody was crying. And so that was a period of time when I think a lot of the women who I'd interviewed for the book, and I myself, had this sort of reckoning. I think it was this idea that if we got a do-over in life, and that all these things have been taken away from us, when we built back, how did we want to do it? And if everything was up for grabs, like going to the office, who knew that was negotiable? What else was negotiable? And so what I saw in a lot of my friends, and what I experienced myself, was just looking around and thinking like, wait a minute, what am I doing? Why am I doing all the things for everybody else? And what else might be possible in my relationships? And then that was a period of time for me, those years after the pandemic, when I dealt with a lot of caregiving, a lot of grief, a lot of loss, a lot of death in my family, and other chaos. And as a result, I thought, like, I'll do a memoir. I'll do a sequel to Also a Poet, or I'll do a sequel to Why We Can't Sleep. Now, more of a bummer than ever. And then I thought, I don't want to do that. That's no fun for me. What would be fun is to write a romance novel. So that is what I did instead.
Thank you for that. Jaclyn, your work is much more scholarly in tone and scope, but it too is a very personal book. I don't think I held this one up, Moving Past Marriage. It's personal in the sense that you interweave your personal story with the sort of logical case that you build for people choosing not to marry, and not only for people individually choosing not to marry, but you're making a case that our society should stop privileging marriage over non-marriage, legally, financially, in terms of social
status conferred.
Status, yes. Tell me a little bit about how, I mean, this is your second book about marriage. Your first book was, and so as a person who's never married, by choice, tell me about your fascination with marriage and how and why this book has so many personal elements in it. I don't know if the other one did. I didn't read it.
Not as many. It's an interesting question. I guess I would start out by differentiating myself. Am I speaking? I'm afraid I'm going to do something evil with this microphone. Am I okay? Yeah. All right. I'll differentiate myself a little bit from the two distinguished authors on this panel by saying I don't believe marriage is particularly personal, and I think one of the real disconnects that we have when we have this conversation is that people slide very fluidly between discussions of marriage and discussions of love, discussions of feelings, discussions of memories, discussions of parents, discussions of therapist sessions, discussions that they had over dinner. Those are, to me, very separate things. I think marriage is a relationship between two people and the state, which gives your sex life licensure. I think marriage is a relationship between two people and history, and the history of marriage is obscene. It is blood-soaked, going back to the Mesopotamian law codes, and even before then, the Hammurabic law codes that are obsessively devoted to marriage in the ancient Near East, that talk about, it's basically a way of dividing respectable and non-respectable women. Respectable women are ones that are virgins until sex and that only have marriage in sex and are veiled. Non-respectable women are women who own their own sexuality and reproductivity. If they have the chutzpah to put a veil on under MAL 43, I think it is, Middle Assyrian Law Code 43, you can be, for grabbing, if a concubine, a prostitute, or just a non-marital woman such as myself, because I don't use the word single, is grabs at that veil and puts it on and assumes the status of a married woman, she can be killed by having her ears and nose cut off and having hot boiling tar poured on her. So that's our beautiful history. So it's a relationship between the couple and history, and it's a relationship that I would like to promote in my book. What I would like is a relationship between us and our non-marital forebears. The Platos, the Hannah Sanishes, the Lucy Craft Lanyers, who the first African-American woman who started a kindergarten and a black school and did all the fundraising and was a principal and also a teacher there. We have this extraordinary history of non-marital people, men and women, and I feel very strongly that when we reclaim that history, we can start to demand civil rights, because there are over 1,000 privileges conferred on marital people that non-marital people such as myself don't get. Now, some of them are small. My married mother got a $200 check from the IRS when her husband passed 20 years so that she could cover funeral expenses. That's something a non-marital person with someone, partner of 40 years wouldn't get, or a best friend of 40 years. Some of them are big. I can't name a Social Security beneficiary. So as I talked personally in the book, when I got tenure, it suddenly occurred to me I was a grown-up. I could stop living. Are you in the academic? I'm sorry, my condolences, but yeah, I could stop living from paycheck to paycheck. I could stop living, looking at my student evaluations with terror. I could stop worrying about meeting every publishing date. I could be late, like I am now, which is horrible. Anyway, the main thing was I wanted to set some financial goals and some financial systems in place. And the first thing I wanted to do was name my sister from another Mr., Frances, as my Social Security beneficiary. We've been together since we were in our early 20s. I've helped her raise 3 beautiful children. Her partner is my dear friend, and I just thought if anybody would be really a wreck, if I predeceased them, it would be Frances. My boyfriend, actually, he'd be fine. I'm not saying he'd be doing a jig, but he'd be okay. She wouldn't be okay. And when I called Social Security, they just said, you're not married, you don't get to name a beneficiary. I said, I've worked since I'm 16. I've been putting money into that system.
It's crazy.
And
I was shocked when I read that.
I was really shocked, and I was even more shocked to learn that married. All right, I'm going to give an example of not my favorite man, Newt Gingrich. Wife number 1, 10 years. Wife number 2, 10 years. Wife number 3, I think they're still together. She's a strong woman. If he predeceases them, all 3 of them, because they hit the 10-year mark, can be his beneficiaries. I'm paying for that. I don't like it. I can't add someone to my health insurance. So it started to occur to me that in this hypersensitive political climate of academia, people were talking about microaggressions, but the macroaggressions against non-marital people were huge, and I had to address them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting book, and you make the legal, financial, societal argument, and you also get into, I think, toward the end of the book, a really wonderful, kind of hopeful chapter where you talk about ways of thinking about life and community and love and helping one another beyond the idea of the marital, which I want to get into, but I also want to talk about the ways within a marriage people try to sort of grasp some kind of freedom, or I guess I was going to ask Molly. I mean, in your case, there's a point where your therapist says, "Oh, the idea of opening the marriage was that by exploring your sexuality in other relationships, that you would gain so much that you would bring it back to your marriage with Stuart." And it's a little bit of a thesis statement about what an open marriage is supposed to do. And I have to confess, having been married and divorced twice, so I'm either an expert or the opposite of an expert. I wrote, "Does this ever work?" Question mark, question mark, question mark. Did it work for you that way?
Well, I mean, I like you calling it a thesis statement. It's kind of like, depending on who you're talking to, you can make that like, oh, and guess what else will happen? Our marriage will get stronger, right? It's not just about me, it's about us. I would say now, looking back, and just where we are right now, because our marriage has evolved and the way our open marriage looks has changed many times over the last 17 years. I'd say I am still the primary beneficiary of my outside relationships. That the relationships I'm in outside of my marriage mostly benefit me. And because of that, I do think, and I think that my husband Stuart's relationships mostly benefit him. But I think because we are both growing and evolving as people, that benefits the marriage. I think when we cut ourselves off from opportunities to grow and change and evolve, however that looks, and it doesn't have to be through outside, physical relationships, but when you don't accommodate the need for the other person to evolve, then I start to lose, any understanding of, what are we doing here again? What is the point of marriage if you're not also, if there's no room for evolution as an individual? I think that's super important. So I think it's a secondary benefit, not a primary benefit, what you're describing, what my therapist said. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that runs through your book is that your husband really was the one who pushed this in the beginning. I mean, I think you were flirting with a man. He found out you had flirted with a man at a bar. You hadn't crossed any lines, and then said it would be kind of sexy if you.
And he would argue that it didn't quite happen like that. You know what I mean? That's the fun about writing your own. I was like, well, then you can write your own memoir. You know what I mean? I was like, that's the way I remember it happening. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
No, I love that. I mean, Ada, in your book, the husband also is like, oh, I think it would be sexy if you did this or that. You know, it'd be sexy it's sexy for me to think about you kissing another man. But then, when he realizes that his wife has really fallen for somebody very deeply, I think the line, I don't know the exact line, but he said, the idea of his wife having sex with someone else turned him on, but the idea of her cuddling with someone else made him want to break dishes. And I'm curious about that because it brings up this issue of like, what is real intimacy, and what can we get? I mean, a lot of it is about compartmentalization. Like, how do you break off a part of yourself? Is it just sexual? Is it more than sexual? Can you even control what your emotions? Of course, you sort of can't. I think that's sort of one of the points of your book. But, I mean, do you feel like, when you were writing this book, tossing aside how autobiographical it is or isn't, did you ever think about an instance where they ended up being like Molly's story, happily open marriage, but changing and growing together, which is really not to spoil it, but not how your book ends up.
Thanks, Kate. Well, it's so funny because people have had such strong reactions to the novel in ways I didn't expect, which made me very glad it was a novel and not a memoir. But some of them thought, oh, this is so anti-polyamory. It's like, because they do it so badly, because it doesn't quite work, because of all these things. And then other people have said, oh, it's so pro-polyamory, which is bad because polyamory is, so I think it's very interesting. This like stirs up so many feelings. And for me, part of the point of the book was just that that love is so unruly, and that it can take over, and it's why it's sort of incredible, I think, and miraculous in situations like Molly's, where the respect is so strong and the rules are so useful, and that things do work out in ways that make everybody happy. That it's I mean, like you said, marriage is very hard. Open marriage is very hard. Non-marital life is hard. I think in different ways, right? All of these paths have
Non-marital life is a blast.
only a lot. I mean, I think there tend to be, but you have to suffer through all these injustices. So, in that way, it's hard because of the outside forces, maybe. So yeah, so I think that's what's interesting to me is the choices we make, and then how they play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the line you have in your book is that trying to control the feelings would be like trying to keep a ghost in jail. Like that, the ghost is going to just get through those bars. Jaclyn, you write in your book that questioning wedlock takes courage in a nation largely devoted to the marriage principle. Obviously, the marriage principle that people, that is sort of firmly policed in our laws is not quite the same as the Code of Hammurabi. I mean, we're not cutting people's noses off anymore. But
if you read the two chapters in my book on people who've been dragged through family court, women and men, you'll read about men who lost their medical licenses and did hard time in jail with felons because of missing a few alimony payments. You'll read about a woman with a special needs child who was told that she had to sell her house so that she could pay her ex-husband $96,000 a year in life durational alimony with no ability to there are fixed situations where you can't appeal it. You will read about people who were reduced to living on $1,100 a year for the rest of their life because they married when they were very young to someone who was emotionally troubled and shouldn't have gotten married, and who can now tap into their Teamsters annuity and their Social Security. No, I'd rather have hot tar poured over my head than, no, one of the things that frightens me, and I don't mean to interrupt you, is just that I feel that exactly the things people talk about, let's go to a therapist and talk about what bothers me about you and what bothers me about you and what bothers you about me, and how we can be more expressive or less expressive. These are very boilerplate things. There should be something, the equivalent of driver's ed, as long as we have marriage, until I finish it. There should be something that's the equivalent of driver's ed, where I had to go to driver's ed when I was 16, and I had to look at someone in a wheelchair. And I had to listen to that person explain how not having a seatbelt on changed her life. And I'm glad I did it, because I've never gotten into a car and not put a seatbelt on. I've never driven drunk once. I was scared. And it was a good educational experience for me. I take that very seriously, getting behind the wheel of a car. But we go into a sentimental haze that obscures all of the really ugly stuff that can happen. And since marriage is about 50% of them end, and people will quibble with you, a little over 50, a little under 50, somewhere between 49 and 52%, I think people who haven't been through it before should at least have to talk to someone for whom it didn't work out so well, and at least have to meet with a lawyer and find out, for instance, if you're in a community property state, from the minute you sign those papers, everything is both of yours. So that's a big deal if you split up.
Sure, no, I mean, I get that. That totally makes sense. I think one of the most hardening parts of the book, though, as I said, is the end where you talk about these non-marital sort of community and companionate ideas. And some of them come from spiritual sources. You talk about in Buddhism and in early Christianity. And I know that Ada's book also deals with a lot of spiritual ideas. I think it's really interesting. Like, I mean, obviously Jesus never married. And many early Christians...
Jesus was non-marital. Was
born out of wedlock.
Born out of wedlock, I don't use the word illegitimate, and there's a woman who's written a brilliant book called The Illegitimacy Narrative of Jesus, and she's a very pious Catholic woman, and the book is a fantastically close reading of the Gospels, explaining why he's clearly born out of wedlock, for which her car was set on fire. So I think that Buddha had to leave marriage to go on his path. He called the son he had fathered with his wife the little fetter. He ended up founding the first monasteries, groups of traveling monks and nuns, and but he didn't feel like he could do it if he didn't have a huge amount of privacy and marriage before that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the tension between, taking care of somebody and then being legally responsible for somebody and then having sex with somebody. These do not always naturally go together in our minds and hearts and lives. And I think with that, we should actually open for questions, because we have a lot of people here who might want to bounce off some ideas.
Okay. So, full disclosure, when we came up with the idea for this panel, I was divorced, living with someone, and now I'm actually engaged. So, I mean, it's not really related, but I thought it was funny. And that you all might get a laugh out of it too. All right, so who wants to be the first?
Don't be shy.
This is your moment.
I'm wondering if any of you have read the book Sex at Dawn, because when I read it, his whole premise is that human beings are not wired for monogamy. It's a recent invention, and we lived for, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years. Humans lived having multiple sexual relationships in small clans of about 100 people, nomadic clans. And whether he's right or wrong is not my point, but it changed the way I think about being human. Like, we totally lost the clan idea. You know, we're into this nuclear marriage. It's so much pressure on that relationship to make it work. Like it's so hard, as you say. So I'm just wondering if you've read the book, if you have comments about it, or any thoughts on that. Thanks.
I know the book really well. I don't want to dominate the panel. Have any of you read Sex at Dawn? Or do
I feel like I should have, but I haven't.
So may
Who's the author?
Go for it.
Okay, so it's not just him. He wrote that with his partner, and she's I believe he's a cultural anthropologist and she's a psychiatrist. Their thesis is that before the Neolithic age, for thousands of years, our ancestors traveled in what were called bandwidth societies, and like you said, these were groups between 100 to 200 people, probably more around 150, and they were hunter-gatherer societies. Now, the premise of this group was sharing. If someone went out on a hunt and had a great hunt and brought back, everything was shared, because the next time they went out and didn't have such a good hunt, they were going to need it from one of their fellow band members. There was shared childcare. Women have always worked, and women did much of the work. And in their analysis, there would have been sexual sharing that would have been a completely normal thing. We do know of situations, the Inuits and also the Masao, in about 50,000 Buddhists who live on a small mountain bordering China, that don't actually have marriage in their culture and that do sexual sharing. So this is built into their culture. I think that what I find, I'm not an anthropologist, and I know that that book has been criticized heavily by people in the field as being written by entertaining popularizers who didn't do the best empirical work, and I'm not in a position to evaluate it. But one thing that it did make me think about is that marriage laws come into being in about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. That's really recent in human history. We've been in our bodies as Homo sapiens for about 150,000 years. So as I see it, it's an experiment that just hasn't particularly worked. It's not, but it is a very modern experiment. Now, remember in the Middle Ages, and the entire goal of someone's life was to be celibate. That was even, Augustine said, if you get married and you have sex with your partner, try to think of them the way a Christian thinks of the person they hate, who they're supposed to love. Because Jesus said it. This is not what you'd call, how to have a hot date. And then, then it changed. And what's really interesting to me about my two fellow panelists is after the Reformation, the Christian marriage ceremony is all about not having adultery, not having, it doesn't say anything about love. It's like, to prevent adultery, to prevent the sin of adultery, to prevent, sexual profligacy, to prevent illegitimacy and bastardy, and it's a pretty it's a pretty intimidating thing. And what they would have said to you, I think, could they step forward from the Boston Bay Colony in 1623, is, well, why did the protagonist of your novel, and why did you get married at all? If you were gonna do, like, you're falling back on a model that was invented not as a romance, that's a 1950s thing, as something to prevent the temptation of sex with others. So why not just scrap the license and do what you want?
I mean, I think that's kind of what I've done.
Okay.
I mean, I got married at 26. I did not intend to be in an open marriage at the time. I wanted to have kids. I was from the Midwest, and I was just doing what you're supposed to do, And I love my husband, and I still love my husband. And I think what your point is very well taken. There's the marriage as an institution, and my understanding of Sex at Dawn is that we really got hard set on monogamy when we had to start thinking about who was going to inherit land, you know, that it was like we had to know who was impregnating the woman, otherwise how are we going to have a patrilineal land ownership? But that wasn't running through my head when I got engaged at 25, you know, and I think it's not running through most people's heads when they're in the midst of getting engaged or something like that, right? And it should be, to your point, but the reason people ask me all the time, why stay married if you're going to have sex with other people? Because I have a very committed relationship with my husband, and we have a life together and a home together, and we're family, and we have children together, and I don't need the piece of paper, but I do want that commitment, and we are extremely committed to each other. And I want to have sex with other people. And what has happened too, like keeping the ghost in jail, yeah, I have fallen in love with other people, and I have multiple partners now, and I love them all, and my life is enriched because of those relationships. And as I say, it's been a hard road to get to where I'm at, and I wouldn't say that everyone should, oh yeah, run out and try it. I mean, it is, beware. It's a lot, because people have a lot of tough feelings come up when you are raised to believe that is how you express love, is through sexual fidelity, and that to not be, you know, only with one person, that means you don't love that person anymore. I mean, that's the way we've been raised, and I think it's important to recognize that for thousands of years that wasn't the way people operated. I wrote a memoir in large part because I didn't want to have to do research, and I didn't want to have to explain to anybody else or what they're doing. I'm a case study of 1, 2 if you count my parents. But I got married because I wanted a long-term committed relationship and a family unit. That was something I wanted, but I've broken the cardinal rules of it, and so now I've had to rethink the whole institution because of that.
We should have more questions, but I'll say quickly that the narrator in the book, she gets married when she's rather young, with the full intention of doing the whole thing, of the monogamy and the primacy and all of it, and then with this sort of opening the door crack, sort of blows the door open in this way where she realizes that this relationship is not, it's not helping her grow into the person she wanted to be, so she either has to change the marriage or leave the marriage.
Okay. One there.
I wanted to ask a question about the choices of women who've decided not to get married, like 50, 60, 70 years ago, and what were their outlooks on life? Because I agree with you, there's a lot of things afforded to women that are married, but what happened to the majority of women who said, you know what, I don't want to be in that relationship. I don't want to be married. I don't want to have anybody have that kind of dominance over me. And it's only, to me, recently that men and women have started to look at each other and says, I don't want to dominate you, and I don't want you to submit to me. I just want us to be partners. I want us to be friends and go back to that band of 100 or whatever, you know, instead of one person having rulership over another. And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it's a brilliant question, and I think that I'm gonna have to try to condense my answer. It depends who you listen to. If you listen to the marriage movement, the self-named marriage movement that emerged in the year 2000 with people like Wade and Geller, who wrote The Case for Marriage, with people like Dr. Diane Medved and Michael Medved, with people like Barbara DeFoe Whitehead, their lives were a tragedy. They died alone in rooms with cats urinating on piles of terrible, mildewy newspapers. They have higher rates of cancer. They have higher rates of insomnia. They have higher rates of depression. They have higher rates of blood pressure. All right, all of this do you know the word drech? The Hebrew, all of this is a stupendous pile of nonsense. It was done with faulty research, and one of the great practitioners of this in our time is Belinda Luscombe for Time Magazine. She has recently written that non-married people or people who are single are more likely to become handicapped. This is a fantasy. My boyfriend is a biostatistician and an MD, and we went through every study. And we also went through the studies done by Bella DePaulo in her book, Singled Out, and by some of the Israeli psychologists working now in this field about the non-marital people that you talk about. They have deeper friendships. They give more to their communities. They are not in what Louis Cozen calls a greedy institution, so there isn't someone encircling them and telling them that you have to like give everything to me, like I'm always primary with you. They give much more meaningful careers. They have lower rates of depression. They have, okay, I'll say that the best study done was done by a guy whose name I'm forgetting now. It's Matthias, the Calhoun study. That was done in the Netherlands, and it was done over a 10-year period, and he studied marital and non-marital people, and he found that what Judith Koons also found from the Interdisciplinary Institute in the Netherlands. That's where they do a lot of good research in Europe because we're so biased here. But what they found was that there is an elevation of happiness in the first years of a marriage. There's this kind of like glow, and then people get less and less happy, and then they become ultimately much more depressed than their non-marital counterparts. Sean Coombs, a sociologist, discovered that one thing married couples spend a lot of time doing is fighting. And it's a waste of the time. And one of the things they fight about a lot is money. And one of the things they could easily do is keep separate bank accounts, but that's not part of the script. So it's, now I'm gonna say that someone I write about in my book is Oprah Winfrey. And I think she's been a non-marital role model. She has said that her friendship with Gayle King is on the equivalent of her relationship with her boyfriend. She has said that friendship matters just as much to her as marriage. She's financially independent. She refers to the girls in this institute that she founded in Africa as her daughters. They don't need to be blood. She has makes time for herself every day to meditate and read. I look at her, I see a thriving woman. And I think that when we connect with not just our ancestors, but people like that, it's just, it's clear that this phony baloney stuff about how if you get married, you'll become increasingly depressed and isolated is really garbage. Maybe, if it was 1951, and everyone around you was married, and gay people were closeted, and they were pressured into marrying people they barely knew, and yes, but no, people are generally do much better when they live outside a marital framework.
So the question I think was about dominance, submission. And I think that's a really interesting question about how relationships, how to get out of those roles and maybe keep what is worthwhile about marriage. And so I'd be curious to hear what Ada and Molly had to say about that.
I think we live in a patriarchal society, and so marriage is going to reflect, heterosexual marriage is going to reflect that patriarchal dynamic, and I think that's why I think in gay marriages, non-monogamy is a lot more common historically, and I had the good fortune of being on Dan Savage's podcast after my book came out, and part of it, what we talked about was like, nobody freaks out about non-monogamy in a gay marriage, but everybody freaks out about non-monogamy in a heterosexual marriage, partly because it is flipping that script of dominance. And, we have a long history of men maybe taking, having multiple partners and cheating on his wife, but the idea that a woman can freely have multiple male partners is making people all a quiver, and I think it's largely because of that, because it's stepping out of a dynamic of one person having power and the other person submitting, and a woman owning her own sexual power. So I think in normalizing non-monogamy makes a contribution to shaking up that dynamic. I don't think it's the only way to shake up that dynamic. But that's, the flack I've gotten from the book over the last year and a half has told me that a lot of people have trouble with women being sexually autonomous.
So the husband in the novel is actually quite nice. And I don't think he's like domineering or dominating, but the protagonist does it herself. She is a Generation X good girl, teacher's pet type person who wants everybody to be happy. And she has gone her whole life doing this very successfully. And then so the marriage and the children and the house and all of those things are this narrative about her goodness and her achievements, and she is good to her friends, and she does volunteer and do all of this giving back, but all of it becomes this sort of way to dominate herself into behaving. And the second she stops behaving and starts asking these questions, and the book is a lot about just asking questions, things start to change a lot. I went to the Taylor Swift show with one of my best friend and my goddaughter, and she's a therapist, and I said, what are you seeing in women of our generation who had this good girl complex? She said a lot of them are blowing their lives up at this particular moment in time. And she said that the line she keeps hearing is, you can't ask me to do everything and not want everything.
You can't ask me to do everything.
And not want anything.
Someone else?
That's interesting.
Molly, I remember in your book, I think it was in your book, or I read something afterwards about one of your sons kind of discovering the open marriage on his own. I am curious, with kind of you being so public and out there, and maybe other open relationships, like how does that work with the kids? And I don't know, I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, well, I felt like that was part of why I felt like I had a certain responsibility to write about my situation. By the time the book came out, my kids were 18 and 21, so that helped. But when they were younger, and the book opens with my older son finding out when he was 13. It was my other son who found out a few weeks after I thought about writing the book. He was 14. And there's a narrative out there that mothers are not supposed to be sexual beings, right? You're supposed to just, park that and not really own it at all. But I feel like, I'm sure feel this way if I had daughters too, but because I have sons, I felt like it's extremely important for my sons to know that I am a whole person, that I do not exist for their service to, take care of. I still do their laundry. It's really bad. My sister is always getting on me. She's like, but I kind of see it as I get to go through their pockets and see. So I'm like, I see the flip side to it, but anyway. But I feel like because of that, my sons also talk to me about real stuff, and they do have relationships, and they do talk to me about them, and I think they see me as a whole person who actually knows some stuff and has been around the block. And I know, I have friends who are divorced and who are dating with kids. There are a lot of women who are dealing with that dynamic of being, with others. I thought this was actually pretty funny. One of my husband's girlfriends, he just met her kids, and the youngest said to him, came up to him, was like, I think my mom's cheating on you. He was like, it's fine. So like, she can do whatever she wants. It's really fine. She's divorced. Anyway, I thought that was funny. But like, the kids are paying attention. They're noticing. But I think it's healthy actually for them to see that that we are whole people that are not just, I don't want my children to think that sex ends in marriage, or that all marriages look alike, or that all women are, not as interested in sex as men are. I think it's important to be your true self. That doesn't mean that I don't have boundaries. I don't talk about it with them in any sort of, my oldest did read the book, but that's on him. My youngest did not. So yeah, we have pretty great conversations though. So I feel good about it.
Any more question? Because I kind of want to follow up on this, and I just want to ask Ada, you have kids too, right? So did your kids read the book? How old are they? Like what was the idea?
It's a novel. So that helped a little bit. So I was like, well, if they read it, it's fine. But no, I think one thing that I've been really lucky in, both when I was writing nonfiction about my life, I've written a bunch of modern love stories and that kind of thing, is the people around me, including my kids, they're really nice to me and proud and supportive in this way where they seem to like that I am brave, and they don't necessarily want to hear all the details of what I'm talking about. It's also a lot of stuff I write is for middle-aged women specifically, and they're like, it does not relate to them and their life. So they're just like, in this abstract way, they're like, good for you, but they're not like studying it, I don't think.
And my youngest is that way too. He's like, I'm proud of you, Mom, but I don't want to read it. It's like, that is a fabulous choice.
But keep the book close.
Yeah, I don't even have copies of it. I like the copies in like Hungarian and Portuguese, but not in English anywhere in the house.
Okay, one last question.
Hi, there was a couple of things that I was wondering about. One, growing up, I was at the end of Generation X, and I remember being in my 20s, and every single person I know got married and did the husband, kids, house thing, and that sort of passed me by. But I felt the pressure to get married, even though I hadn't met anybody I wanted to get married to. But I'm still single, I never got married. But I realized by the time I was in my 30s that I never had any celebrations celebrating my life because I was single. We had the baby showers, we had the wedding showers, we had the weddings, we had all these things, stuff for their kids and everything. And like as the single person, you get more and more and more pushed out of the life of all of your friends because you don't have the kids, they don't have time for you anymore, and nobody really cares about what's going on in your life when you're single after a little while. They're just busy with the family life. And it struck me one day, it's like why do single people not have any celebrations? There's no celebrations for your career or anything. So I was wondering if anybody experienced that, or people that you know of, or if you have any comments on that. And also the other thing to me is, I've always wanted to be in a poly relationship, but one, I still feel that super tenseness of society saying you have to be a certain way, so I just feel afraid. And then also, just practically speaking, don't you have to deal with a lot of jealousies? And that just seems like it would get so messy and complicated. So if you guys want to comment on any of that, I have a lot of thoughts.
I can take the first, and then I think I should.
I mean, I think we could really be here all night with that one.
Okay,
Steve.
so, okay, should I?
Also, your comment about the party.
What she was just saying, and I think that was so beautiful, and it is so true, because you have done amazing, wonderful things, and why is the only way you get to celebrate your life and your accomplishments is within the confounds of a marriage, right? You wrote a book, you planted a garden, all kind of wonderful things that you did. Why can't we celebrate that? Why would you even, and I feel you too, almost feeling selfish, like, why am I bringing all the attention upon myself? Because I did it. Because I did it. Yeah, good for us, right? Good for whatever we do. Why don't we create those celebrations for our accomplishments. It does, it's not, I just, why can't we do that?
No, it's a great question, and I'll just say that I went undercover for my first book as a bride at Bloomingdale's, and I said, I'm getting married, and sweetheart, I could not believe the things those ladies said to me. You're a real person now. You're a whole woman. I was like, well, that's a relief. You're gonna get register for the expensive ones. No, that's the cheap. Get everything you need. This is your time. What about the people that don't get married? No, don't worry about them. So I wrote a whole chapter about this that's been pretty widely anthologized. But what I decided to suggest, because I have a lot of optimism because of people like you, that are really, and you, that are internalizing this disjunction, this cognitive dissonance we have, is that everybody, when they turn 25, gets a party. And that's the first thing, and they get to register. And they register for whatever they want. They, bed sheets, linens, beautiful. A reader sent me a Ralph Lauren plate saying, sorry, this is all I could afford, but whatever you want. And that's just turning 25. And then if you're a more spiritual or religious-minded person, you can make it a commitment, and it can be a commitment to the most important people in your life. Now, just speaking about Oprah and Gayle, they wore diamond rings to honor their friendship, and they took them off because they were so sick of people asking them if they were gay. A couple, they said if we were a gay couple, we'd say it. We're not. I mean, if this is, so you have these commitment ceremonies, and we have precedents for this. There's also a sworn spinster ceremony in China, where a woman swears to spinsterhood, which is like what I would do. And she cuts her hair off. Just the long hair. But the basic thing would be, one of those people could be a lover, but you could have, like, the most formative person in my life is my best male friend, who was my college professor. He got me thinking about all this. He was gay 30 years ago, and it's a life-structuring friendship. I can't imagine where I'd be without him. He saved my life, he gave me a life, and he gave me the life of the mind. And I would want to make a commitment. I'm not making a commitment to Jim and not making a commitment to Akeen. I'm sorry, but that just does not seem right. And to my sister and to our kids. And you just take all your people and make a commitment to each one of them. And one of them can be, you're not leaving out sex and a sexual partner. You're including it in the fabric of your life. So that's what I suggested. And I hope that once governments get out of the licensure business, that starts to pick up. One of the things, though, I should say is, like, to your point, like with gay marriage, there's been a huge bonanza in the bridal and groom industry of, there are gay marriage bazaars, there are people that offer them special mortgage rates, there are tuxedos, matching tuxedos for grooms, special honeymoons, special insurance rates for this is a moneymaker. This is a $3 billion a year industry, and it's hard in this country, which is so so corporate oriented, and to knock that down, because the financial incentives of the marriage planners, the florists, the mortgage brokers, the wedding coordinators are so they make a lot of money. So it's going to take an effort, but I love what you said. You should make your own party. People are also doing divorce parties. Now, for the jealousy thing, which I think is kind of like the elephant in the room, I'm going to have to turn it over to the... Yeah, that's what I've been wondering that the whole time, so... Yeah.
Jealousy is brutal. And then you move through it, and it took me years and years and years. And I have a partner now who is moving through it with me, because I have multiple partners, and this is new for him. But people talk about, like, shadow work is like this new thing that we benefit from looking at whatever is underneath that jealousy. That jealousy is there to protect us. That we're like, oh no, I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy. I don't feel loved, I feel insecure, and all those things are really valid. And I think doing, jumping in or committing to a polyamorous relationship will be something that, the jealousy will be something that will make you grow. Not everybody wants to do it, but having done that work, I feel a lot freer now, and I feel a lot more in love with myself as a result.
Somebody in the book says, love is infinite, but time is not. So a lot of the logistics, I think, wind up being not even around love, often is around feeling somebody turn away, right? Or, to
And
time.
I'll tell you that that's the way I used to feel. Now I feel like time is just, it's not real. I mean,
Time is not real.
Time is not real. I find time for everybody, and I don't know how. But I have 4 partners, and I don't know how. Yeah.
That is astonishing. No, just.
Next up is the
Just
time management
legit.
class.
I don't see them every day, But yeah, it's a journey. It's a journey.
And I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and brave is definitely the word for all of you. And thank you so much for coming with an open mind and with your questions. And let's all give these people a hand.